Hello, lovely souls, and welcome to Emily Whispers. I'm Emily, and I'm so happy you decided to join me tonight. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop a comment and say hello. I love connecting with each of you. If these little moments bring you peace, please like and subscribe so we can share more of them together. Now find your cozy spot. Wrap yourself in a blanket if you like. Take a slow, gentle breath, and let's drift into tonight's story. My name is Maya. I am in my 20s, and I am from a small town in Kansas. When I was in college, I used to work the late shift at a gas station on a lonely stretch of highway to help pay for tuition. Any night I did not have early classes the next day, I would drive out there at 9 in the evening, work from 10 until 6 in the morning. Then I would drive back to campus just as the sun was coming up. It was a pretty good gig, really. After the initial rush of truckers around 10, the last 6 or 7 hours were usually dead quiet. If my boss was not on site, I could usually get away with just sitting in the office and studying between the 1 or 2 customers who might wander in. One night, a Tuesday it was, a man walked into the gas station who had to be in his late 40s or 50s. His appearance grabbed my attention right away because when I looked up from my textbook, I saw he was the spitting image of an old-time movie cowboy, but one that had fallen on very hard times. My grandpa, God rest his soul, was a huge Westerns fan, and I used to watch all his old movies with him when I was a kid. I was always captivated by the stoic, handsome faces of the actors. This guy had that same tall, lean build, the same sharp jawline, but he looked like a ghost. He had the same piercing blue eyes, but they were tired and sunken. He had much sharper features and looked extremely gaunt, like a skeleton with a thin layer of dry, weathered skin stretched over it. He was dressed the part too, with a worn-out denim jacket, a faded plaid shirt, and what looked like old dusty cowboy boots. It would have been a solid look too, if it were not for the sorry state his clothes were in. Instead of making him look rugged, they just made him look strange, grimy, and creepy. I usually did not concern myself with people's appearances much. It was a gas station, not a country club, so even a vampire could walk in, fangs dripping, and I would not say a word if he just paid for his gas and left. In this case, I think I would have preferred a vampire to this man. He grabbed a bottle of soda from the cooler, walked up to the counter, and asked for $20 of gas on whatever pump it was. I took his money, gave him his change, and thanked him for his business. 99 times out of 100, a guy would just say, "Thanks, ma'am," and then head on out. But this man stayed by the counter, looked at me, and then said, "You are a real pretty thing, are not you?" To say my skin crawled would have been the understatement of the century. I am not great at taking compliments as it is, which I know is a big me problem. But when the compliments come as greasy and creepily spoken as his, it makes me feel sick. And I do mean creepily spoken, too. It was not just some throwaway comment as he was walking out. He drew out the word real before pretty like. "You are a real pretty thing, are not you?" And the "are not you" was all soft and low, like he was telling me a secret. I get that we had a big age gap between us, but I was a grown woman, not some naive kid. Even back then, I knew better than to talk back to a stranger like that. It is not worth the risk. So instead of being sharp with him, I said thank you in a polite but very reserved way, and then stepped away from the counter to make it look like I had to restock some shelves. It was a trick that I had used once or twice, a gesture that said, I would love to stop and chat, but duty calls. For the most part, the men attempting to flirt with me took the hint and made their way back to their cars. But in this man's case, I turned my back on him and he immediately asked, "Where you going?" With as pleasant a smile as I could manage, I turned back and was about to tell him I was off to continue my stalking. Always a solid excuse when he said, "Do not walk away from me. I am trying to talk to you." There was just a hint of aggression creeping into his voice when he said it too. Just enough to get me thinking, uh-oh, this guy is going to be a problem, is not he? I started explaining that as much as I would like to stop and chat, I had work to do. My exact words were, "I am on the clock." To which he replied, "Well, I am a customer." And then started telling me how he did not often get to talk to a girl as pretty as me, so he wanted to make the most of it. I tried telling him that as much as I appreciated the compliment, I would get into trouble with my boss if I did not complete my assigned workload. The man just waved away my concerns and then told me, "I will deal with your boss if he complains." Then, just as I was about to reply, he told me, "I wish I was as pretty as you." I know some of you might be thinking I am a bit full of myself, dropping the word pretty a lot, but it was verbatim what he was saying to me. I am not just using this whole thing to drop a not so subtle, humble brag. And also, I am bad at handling compliments as it is, but for a grown man to say, "I wish I was as pretty as you," in the slimy, leering way he did was just this whole new level of cringe for me. In response, the only thing that came to mind for me was to say something about how inappropriate that was in a professional setting. And while I was sure his intentions were pure self-preservative flattery, by the way, I did not appreciate him commenting on my appearance. The guy just laughed, this short, sharp sound, and then asked me, "Do not you like being pretty?" For the first time in our conversation, I could not think of a response, either professional or heartfelt. I just wanted to run into the stockroom, slam the door, and kick the crap out of a few cardboard boxes while pretending that they were this creep's head. But I was scared that if I did, he might follow me. So instead, I tried my best to stand my ground and repeated that I did not appreciate his tone or his question. I then told him that if he did not leave the premises, I would call the sheriff. A little bit more of that aggression crept into his voice, and he asked me, "What? You are really going to call the law just because someone called you pretty? Are you kidding me?" I did not even want to engage with him. So, I just asked him to leave and added some preemptive thanks to make my point. There was a bit more back and forth with him saying how he was a customer and was not going to leave. And then, when I pulled out my phone as if to say I really am about to call 911, he says this, "You know, if I looked like you, I would just stay at home all day with no clothes on." just staring at myself in the mirror. To this day, that is still one of the most skin-crawlingly creepy things a man has ever said to me. At the time, I was so angry I could have screamed. But I tried my very best to keep my cool and just asked him to leave again. The man started going off on one about how I needed to learn to take a compliment, and then said he wished he got half the amount of attention that I did, which was just a bizarre thing to say because he did not even know me. I just kept asking him to leave on repeat, assuming it was just a matter of time before he ran out of steam and did leave. But he kept going and going and going. He started saying something about how depressed I would be when I got older and lost my looks. How once they had been taken away from me, I would be nothing but a pathetic, undesirable waste of space, and I would end up putting my head in an oven. This guy was off his rocker, and that comment really pushed me closer to the edge in terms of just snapping and screaming at him. But I just clenched my teeth and repeated myself for the 10th time that he needed to leave. And that is when he said, "If you do not want the attention, if you do not like being pretty, then I can make you not so pretty if you want." The threat immediately silenced me, but it did not paralyze me. The second after he said that, I brought up on my phone that I had dialed the sheriff, and then I asked for them. The guy did a sort of fake, outraged laugh, but then his voice changed almost completely. It went from a sneer to a very deep, guttural growl. He said if I had such a big problem being pretty, he could come over the counter and smash my face in until I did not look like a person anymore. He said my friends and family would not recognize me when he was done, and I could forget about any kind strangers calling me pretty, because I would be as ugly on the outside as I was on the inside. By the time I had been connected to the dispatcher, there was a tremor in my voice as I started telling the operator what was happening. It was probably one of the more stressful experiences of my entire life, to be honest. Because while I was watching the man to make sure he did not jump over the counter, and while I could not help but hear all the horrific stuff he was saying, I had to concentrate on giving all the necessary info to the sheriff's department. It was like total mental overload. And the more stressed I got, the more upset I got. I remember how the man said something like, "I would love to cut your face off and wear it." I would stare at myself in the mirror and dance around wearing your clothes while I pretend that I am you. I heard that. Then the operator said, "A deputy is on their way." And then I just lost it. I started screaming at that guy, telling him how the sheriff was on the way, how he was going to get arrested if he did not get out while he still had the chance. Only then did he start making his way towards the door. But while he did, he had a load of stuff about how he would be back the next day to teach me a lesson in manners. And all this other stuff he never followed up on. Thank God. The deputy was there in minutes. I showed him the CCTV footage, and as soon as I did, the officer instantly recognized the man who had been harassing me. He said his name was Silas, and that he was a well-known problem in the county. Apparently, this was something Silas did a lot. According to the deputy, the sheriff's department had already received several complaints regarding his habit of harassing lone women, especially ones that were working, and could not otherwise just walk away from him. It was like his thing. According to the officer, he was just weeks away from being arrested and charged. They were still waiting to get the go-ahead from the DA, but when they did, Silas was probably going to prison for a few months at the very least. I could not have asked for a better outcome. And I think they actually went through with what they said because I never saw that Silas again. Not around the gas station, not around town, anywhere. I do not know the guy's actual full name, so I have never been able to look it up to find out how much time he actually got, if any. But the fact that I never saw him around the station again was a good indicator that he had finally gotten what he deserved. I used to work nights at a roadside convenience store called the Pine Creek Stop and Go, out in a remote part of rural Oregon. I used to drive up from Portland, get there around 11 at night, and then work the quiet hours until 7 in the morning when my boss, a guy named Mr. Henderson, came over to relieve me. Henderson lived right next door to the store in a small house that he had built himself. There was no way he built that whole thing on his own, but he was far too nice for me to call him out on it, so I just let it be. He was a great boss, too. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Not many folks can say that they had a boss who would have done almost anything to keep them safe, but I can. It makes me feel a little guilty, sometimes, that I do not head up there to visit him more. But I do not like driving around Pine Creek anymore. I do not like going anywhere near the place. By the end of this story, I think you are going to understand why. I worked at the Stop and Go for 7 months and 2 weeks, working anything from 2 to 5 nights a week, depending on my class schedule. Not a single customer in all the time I worked there ever gave me a single ounce of trouble. It was one of the best jobs I ever had in that respect. It was always a little busier on weekends, but during weeknights, I would sometimes serve only 2 or 3 customers a night and spend the rest of my time reading textbooks, back when I was trying to get through college. Henderson was really chill like that. He did not give me a bunch of cleaning tasks, and he did not give me any busy work at all, actually. He only ever had one rule. If anyone ever showed up late at night, acting strange in any way, I was to call him right away. It did not matter if the call woke him and his wife up from the deepest sleep. If anyone was acting sketchy, Henderson wanted to know about it. I figured that was fair enough. The store was Henderson's whole life. It was his retirement plan. So, if it went up in flames, well, you see where I am going with this. So, even though it felt slightly embarrassing, as in I felt like I could take care of the store myself, I agreed to give Henderson a call every time there was any kind of disturbance. When he first told me about his little golden rule, I would be lying if I said that it did not make me a little nervous. I guess it suggested that there were a lot of weird people who came by the store at night, but that could not have been further from the truth. Like I said, 7 whole months, and not a single instance of weird or disturbing behavior. And then one night, it happened. I was in the back office one night, splitting my attention between the security monitors and a history textbook when I suddenly saw a lone figure approaching the store from the highway. We had 3 cameras, one facing the pumps, one facing the approach to the store, and a third which allowed me to watch the inside of the store from the back office. I could see the man walking towards the store, past the pumps, and then into the view of the second camera. But then instead of walking into the store like literally everybody else, he stopped dead outside the door. He was right in the view of the second camera. So I am looking at this guy fairly close up, and he looked like a perfectly normal, middle-aged man. He looked like he had on a clean but old-fashioned suit, like he was heading to a funeral or a wedding, which was very out of place for that time of night in the middle of nowhere. Literally the most unremarkable-looking guy that could ever walk through our door. But his behavior most definitely got my attention. I guess it is not entirely true that nothing weird ever happened, because there was one previous occasion where I called Henderson in the middle of the night. Some local old man was out by the road, just staring up at the stars. It was a Saturday and had to be maybe 4 to 4:30 in the morning. But just like Henderson said, I gave him a call at his house. I told him about the old man and how it was kind of freaking me out. He asked for a description. I gave him one, and then he tells me, "Oh, that is just old Mr. Abernathy. He does that sometimes. He will head home once his neck gets sore." And then, you know what? He did. He eventually lowered his head and then just kind of walked off down the road. Anyway, the guy in the old suit stopped dead and just stood there in front of the camera, not moving a muscle. Not nearly as freaky as staring at the sky for an hour, but still weird nonetheless. I figured he was, I do not know, taking a moment to think or something. But then, as I am watching him, his head starts slowly moving, turning his neck until he is staring right into the camera lens. I know it was just an illusion, but it felt like he was staring directly at me. And that was easily one of the most unnerving sensations I have ever experienced. Once the guy's behavior reached a concerning level of weird, I grabbed the phone and called Henderson. I did not even feel embarrassed doing it either. Whatever that guy's problem was, it was not dementia. It was something way scarier than that. Henderson picked up the phone. Then once again, he asked me to describe the person acting weird. I started describing the guy in the suit, and then the next thing I know, the line went dead. I looked back at the screen, and the guy had disappeared from view. But he was not in the store either. So I am thinking, where the hell did he go? But at the same time, I am also thinking, why did Henderson just hang up on me? He told me to call him if something weird started to happen. The first time, he sounded sleepy, but pretty calm. So, I was wondering what was so different about that time when I suddenly saw him on the monitors. Henderson was running towards the store in nothing but his long johns and a t-shirt, and he was carrying a shotgun in his hands. He burst into the store and asked me where he was. Then, when I said the guy just disappeared and that I think he just walked off, Henderson ran past me into the office to check the monitors. I am freaking out too, because what the hell is he carrying that shotgun for? But no matter how many times I asked him what was going on. He kept silencing me and telling me that I needed to concentrate as he ran back the security footage to get a look at the guy's face. I watched him rewinding the footage until he finally found what he was looking for. And when he did, I watched Henderson turn completely pale. Whoever it was, Henderson was terrified of him. So terrified that he felt the need to come running over with a shotgun to protect me. And then that scared the hell out of me, too. Henderson sent me home that night after calling the cops. And the next day, he called to say that he would understand if I did not want to come back to work. I asked just one time if he could tell me who the man was, and Henderson paused and then repeated the part about understanding if I did not want to come back. I thanked him for the job, wished him luck, and then just hung up. Like I said earlier, I still feel guilty about not going up to see him more. He was a great guy and a great boss. But without knowing who that guy was, without knowing why Henderson was so scared of him, I could not put myself in the position of working for him anymore. I did not want to die for some stupid convenience store job, no matter how cool my boss was. And if there was a guy out there who scared the hell out of one of the toughest old men I had ever known, then what chance in hell did I have? Back when I was in my sophomore year of college, I used to work weekends at a rural gas station here in my home state of Oklahoma. I worked the second shift every Saturday and Sunday, so from 2 in the afternoon to around 9 at night. Early one spring afternoon, I set off to work with nothing but a few wispy clouds in a clear blue sky. Now, call me sentimental, but I love driving around Oklahoma. I do not think there is any place quite like it. You hit the highway from some small town, and it is like the whole world stretches out in front of you for as far as the eye can see. There is an almost unbroken skyline, only occasionally interrupted by a grain silo, a farmhouse, or a cluster of wind-bent trees. It can look pretty as a picture on a sunny day. And up until that point, April had brought only sunshine and showers. But as I drove along the highway that afternoon and looked off into the distance, I saw some really scary-looking storm clouds rolling in. The general rule is that most storm clouds look much scarier than they actually are, especially when there is that big wall of angry-looking clouds facing you down like something straight out of the Bible. But most of the time you get a little rain, you get a little wind, and nothing much else to worry about. However, on this occasion, something told me it was going to be a bad one. By the time I got to the gas station, the storm warnings were being broadcast over the local radio stations. My coworker, Kevin, and I normally did a quick handover, but since we got the storm warnings, we both had a hell of a lot more work on our hands. We had to lock all the windows, then either secure all of our outdoor fixtures or drag them inside. And then we had to inspect the pumps and all that kind of stuff before shutting off the fuel completely. Kevin went off to fuel up the generator just in case we lost power, as I went off to assemble a bunch of flashlights and batteries. We We obviously could not use candles with it being a gas station, so it was a major priority. We already had our designated shelter lined up, the station's windowless office. So after ensuring the first aid kit was fully stocked, we kept the radio tuned up and our ears wide open for weather alerts and other announcements. We figured people would stay home, and we would be in for a pretty turbulent but relatively lonely shift. But we were wrong. One by one, 2 vehicles rolled into the lot over the course of about an hour. One was an old RV driven by an elderly couple, and the other was a beat-up sedan containing a young man who looked to be on a cross-country trip. Wherever they had been, the path home led directly through the storm. So instead of risking their lives, they came to us and begged for shelter, and we could not say no to them. We were not exactly equipped to shelter that many people, but there was just no turning them away under these circumstances. We let everybody help themselves to drinks and snacks if they were hungry, mainly to try and calm their nerves as the incoming storm got worse and worse. And boy, oh boy, did it get worse. We all stayed relatively calm until we heard the tornado sirens going off. I am pretty sure all the grown-ups there had heard the sound before, but it scared the hell out of the elderly woman, who started to shake and pray under her breath. Then, when something started flying off of our roof, a piece of debris hit the RV, and the sound of the metal crunching made the old woman cry out in fear. The poor woman just did not understand what was happening. It only took a few more moments of things falling off of our roof before we knew that we had to find shelter in the station's office. There was just enough room to fit everyone, and thankfully, with the office shielding us from the sound of the sirens and the howling winds, the old woman started to calm down a little. But when something flew across the parking lot and smashed through the big plate glass window, it made a sound like a bomb exploding. The sound scared the hell out of me and Kevin, and by that point, we were kind of expecting it. But the poor old woman nearly lost her mind. She must have thought the whole building was coming down, and so did her husband, because as she started shrieking, he tried to comfort her, but she had some kind of panic attack and tried to run back to their RV. Once we realized what she was trying to do, Kevin lunged at her, telling her how going outside meant absolute death, and she would not listen. She tried to fight him, screaming and flailing, and it took me and the other young driver to subdue her. The poor woman was screeching so hard she could barely breathe, watching as she struggled a little more, and then just burst into tears. Then, and only then, did she stop struggling, as she cried and told us over and over again that she was sorry. We rode out the storm together for the next few hours, and I remember how the thing that really united us and kept us from getting too frightened was the goal of keeping that poor old woman from losing her mind. I worked so hard at keeping her calm and reassuring her that we were all going to be just fine. But sometimes when I think about it, I think we were all trying to reassure ourselves, too. And talking to her like we were was sort of projecting, I think. Eventually, the sounds of the winds died down, and after about an hour or so, it looked like it was safe for everyone to make a move. We walked into the store to find it absolutely trashed. So much stuff had blown in that it was impossible to determine what exactly had smashed the window and made that explosion sound. Glass, snacks, magazines, and debris were just everywhere. We had to tread very carefully over it all to keep from falling on the carpet of shards. The folks thanked us before they got into their vehicles, especially the old man, who thanked the other driver for helping keep his wife calm when he too was almost losing his mind. After that, everyone except me and my coworker went their separate ways, leaving me and him standing there, just thinking, what in the hell did we just go through? I could not remember getting on the riverboat. Yet, here I sat in a private cabin, watching the Louisiana swampland slide past in shades of murky green and brown. The invitation lay on the small table, its fancy script seeming to shimmer before my eyes as if I were looking at it through the humid air. You are cordially invited to a gathering at Blackwater Plantation on the evening of August 12th. Your presence is essential. A carriage will meet you at the landing at dusk. Yours in anticipation, the host. There was no signature, no return address, only the faint smell of jasmine clinging to the thick paper, as if it had been kept in a drawer with dried blossoms for many years. I folded the letter and put it back in my coat pocket. Through the window, the bayou slipped by, the cypress trees draped in moss, stretching endlessly under a hazy sky. I could not quite remember why I had agreed to this trip. Name Blackwater Plantation stirred something in my memory, a deep, unsettling feeling like a slow current pulling me under. But the details never quite broke the surface. The riverboat's horn sounded, a low moan that echoed across the water, signaling our arrival. I collected my small travel bag and stepped onto the wooden landing, my breath catching in the thick, humid air. The landing was deserted, except for a tall man in a dark suit who approached me with a steady, unhurried pace. Mr. Sterling. His voice was smooth, but I heard an undercurrent of something I could not place. I am Franklin, the driver. If you would follow me, please. The carriage was an old horse-drawn model, beautifully maintained despite its age. As we traveled down the long, oak-lined drive away from the river, I noticed other carriages, both ahead and behind us, each carrying a single passenger, each heading in the same direction. The procession felt strangely formal, like a slow march to a somber event. "Tell me," I said to Franklin's silhouette against the fading light, "what sort of gathering is this meant to be?" Franklin's gaze met mine briefly in the reflection of a small mirror. "I believe you will find that out soon enough, sir." The trees grew thicker as we moved deeper into the property, blocking out the last of the evening light. When Blackwater Plantation finally came into view, I felt my breath catch. The house rose from the landscape like a ghost, all white columns and dark windows that reflected nothing, verandas wrapped around it like skeletal arms, and the grounds stretched away into the encroaching darkness. "Here we are," Franklin announced, though his tone suggested this was not a place for celebration. The other carriages were already letting out their passengers in the circular drive. I counted 9 figures in the gathering twilight, each moving with the same hesitant steps I felt in my own legs. They were all dressed in fine clothes, as if they had all understood some unwritten rule about the evening's dress code. A woman with perfectly styled gray hair approached first. "I am Mrs. Alina Vance," she said, offering a gloved hand. How strange that we should all arrive at the exact same moment. Arthur Sterling. Yes, rather perfectly timed, is it not? The others began to introduce themselves. Dr. Alistair Finch, a man of about 60 with sharp, intelligent eyes. Miss Clara Bellwether, a younger woman who clutched her shawl as if the humid air were a winter chill. Major Harrison Cole, who carried himself like a military man even in his civilian suit. Mrs. Beatrice Croft, whose diamonds caught the last glimmers of daylight. Mr. Samuel Pike, a nervous, thin man who kept adjusting his tie. Miss Evelyn Reed, young and pale, with the look of someone who rarely saw the sun. Mr. Walter Bishop, elderly and frail, leaning heavily on a cane. And finally, Miss Genevieve Dubois, who stood a little apart from the group, her dark eyes scanning the plantation house with what looked like recognition. "Well," Dr. Finch said, his voice carrying the natural authority of his profession, "I suppose we should make our way inside. Our host is likely waiting." The massive cypress door stood open, revealing a grand entrance hall lit by gas lamps in brass fixtures. Our footsteps echoed on the marble floor as we entered, the sound seeming to stir something in the deep shadows of the house. A tall case clock in the corner chimed 7 times, its deep notes hanging in the humid air like a warning. "Hello," Dr. Finch called out. "We are here for the gathering." No answer came, only the soft whisper of a breeze moving through the tall, open windows. Mrs. Vance shivered despite her expensive wrap. Perhaps our host has been held up. These old plantations can be quite a lot to manage. We moved deeper into the house, following a hallway lined with portraits, whose painted eyes seemed to watch us as we passed. The dining room, when we found it, was both stunning and unsettling. A long mahogany table dominated the space, set for 10, with crystal so fine it was nearly invisible. The gas lamps flickered, casting shifting shadows on the dark, wood-paneled walls. 10 places, Miss Bellwether observed, her voice barely a whisper. But we are only 9. Major Cole pulled out a chair for Mrs. Croft. Perhaps our host intends to join us. We seated ourselves around the table, leaving the chair at the head empty. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, broken only by the chirping of crickets from the darkness outside. I found myself studying the faces around the table, searching for some connection, some reason why we had all been brought to this place. There was something familiar about each of them, as if I had met them all before in a dream I could not quite recall. "I must admit," Dr. Finch said finally, "I cannot remember precisely why I accepted this invitation. The letter arrived, and it just seemed vital that I attend." Murmurs of agreement went around the table. Miss Reed twisted a corner of her napkin in her pale fingers. I had the most peculiar feeling on the journey here, as if I had traveled this road before. "The bayou can play tricks on your memory," Mr. Bishop said, though his voice lacked any real conviction. All this stillness, this heavy air, it can make a person feel quite lost. Mrs. Croft reached for her water goblet, then paused. Has anyone actually met our host? I do not recall being greeted when we arrived. We looked at one another with growing unease. The gas lamps seemed to flicker more violently now, as if stirred by the approaching storm. Perhaps Mr. Pike suggested, pushing his glasses up his nose. We should simply begin. Our host may be watching from somewhere, waiting for the right moment to appear. As if summoned by his words, the first course appeared on our plates, not brought by servants, but simply materializing as we watched. Gumbo, rich and dark, steaming in porcelain bowls. Miss Dubois, who had been silent until now, spoke in a low, musical voice. How lovely. Gumbo was always a specialty of the house. Was it? Mrs. Vance asked, lifting her spoon with a trembling hand. I cannot seem to remember the last time I was at such a grand dinner. The gumbo was delicious, warming us from the inside as the evening chill began to seep through the plantation's old walls. Course followed course in the same mysterious way. Fried chicken, collard greens, shrimp, and grits. The wine flowed freely, loosening our tongues and softening the edges of our shared anxiety. You know, Major Cole said, his military posture somewhat relaxed by the wine. I have the strangest feeling that I have sat at this very table before, in this exact chair. Mrs. Vance suddenly stood and walked to the far wall, her fingers tracing a pattern in the dark, flocked wallpaper, an intricate design of magnolia blossoms that seemed to bloom under her touch. I know this pattern, she murmured. I remember tracing it with my finger when I was nervous. Dr. Finch found himself reaching for a particular gas lamp, adjusting its flame without thinking. This one always burns a little too high, he said, then stopped, startled by his own words. But how could I possibly know that? Miss Reed rose abruptly and walked to a door hidden in the paneling, her hand finding the concealed latch immediately. The service corridor, she whispered. It goes to the kitchen. Miss Bellwether set down her fork with a sharp noise. Stop it. Please, just stop it. This is making me very uncomfortable. But surely you feel it too, Miss Reed pressed, her voice shaking. This feeling of déjà vu. I feel nothing of the sort, Miss Bellwether replied, though her hands trembled as she reached for her wine goblet. The meal continued, the conversation flowing and stopping like a river changing course. We spoke of our lives, our work, our families, though I noticed that the details seemed strangely fuzzy, as if we were all recalling a story we had only half read. Dr. Finch mentioned his clinic in New Orleans, but could not recall its street name. Mrs. Croft spoke of her late husband's shipping business, but the specifics were a blur. It was during the main course that Mr. Pike began to cough. At first, it was just a small interruption, perhaps a piece of food caught in his throat, but the coughing grew more violent, more frantic. His face turned red, then began to take on a purplish color as he clawed at his collar. Good heavens, man, what is it? Dr. Finch leaped from his chair, moving to help the distressed man. Mr. Pike's eyes bulged with terror as he pointed at his throat, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. His body convulsed, knocking over his wine and sending the red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. "He is choking," Mrs. Vance cried, rising from her seat. "Someone do something." But even as Dr. Finch tried to help, Mr. Pike's struggles began to fade. His face went from purple to gray, and then to a terrible stillness. He slumped forward onto the table, his glasses sliding from his nose to shatter on the marble floor. The silence that followed was absolute. Miss Dubois reached across the table with a calm and practiced motion and closed Mr. Pike's staring eyes, a gesture so steady, so unsurprised, that it sent a chill through the rest of us. "Is he?" Miss Reed whispered. Dr. Finch checked for a pulse, then slowly shook his head. "I am afraid Mr. Pike has passed away." Mrs. Croft began to weep deep, gasping sobs that echoed off the high ceilings. But how could he just die like that? Miss Dubois folded her napkin with deliberate care, her expression one of deep sadness rather than shock. "People do die suddenly at dinner parties," she said quietly, "more often than you might imagine. But he was perfectly fine moments ago." Major Cole protested, talking, laughing, and then we stared at Mr. Pike's still form, the reality of death invading our strange evening like an uninvited guest. The gas lamps continued to flicker, casting shifting shadows that made the dead man's face seem to twitch. "We should call for help," I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "The police, a doctor." "I am a doctor," Dr. Finch reminded me. "And I am afraid there is nothing to be done for poor Mr. Pike now. But surely we cannot simply continue our meal with a corpse at the table," Mrs. Vance said, her voice rising with hysteria. As if in response to her words, Mr. Pike's body began to fade. Not suddenly, not all at once, but gradually, like steam rising from the bayou in the morning. Within moments, both he and his chair had vanished completely, leaving only 8 diners around a table set for 10. The remaining guests stared at the empty space in horrified silence, all except Miss Dubois, who simply adjusted her place setting and continued with her meal as if nothing unusual had happened. "Did you see?" Mrs. Vance began, then stopped. "We all saw it," Major Cole said firmly, his eyes fixed on Miss Dubois' unnervingly calm face. "The question is what it means." Mrs. Croft's sobs had quieted to whimpers. "I want to leave. I want to leave this place right now." "Of course," Dr. Finch said, "we should all leave. This evening has become most inappropriate." But when we tried to rise from our chairs, we found we could not. Some invisible force held us in place, as surely as if we had been shackled to our seats. What in heaven's name? Mr. Bishop struggled against his unseen bonds, his cane clattering to the floor. Panic began to spread around the table like a fever. Voices rose, some pleading, others angry, all desperate to understand what was happening to us. "Please," I called out to the darkness beyond the lamplight. "If someone is there, if you are watching this, please just tell us what you want." The clock in the entrance hall chimed 9 times, and with the final chime, the next course appeared on our plates. Pecan-crusted catfish, perfectly cooked, accompanied by rice and steamed vegetables. The sight of the food, after witnessing Mr. Pike's death, was sickening. Yet, I found myself lifting my fork. Miss Reed clawed at her neck, knocking over her water goblet, her breath coming in shorter and shorter gasps. "Not again," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Please, not again, again." Dr. Finch moved to help her, but his hands passed right through her body as if she were made of smoke. Miss Reed's face twisted with terror and pain as she fought for a breath that would not come. Her struggles grew weaker, more desperate, until finally she slumped forward just as Mr. Pike had done. And like him, she began to fade until she was gone entirely. 7 now. 7 diners at a table set for 10. "This is impossible," Dr. Finch said, though his voice held no belief. "People do not simply vanish." "Do they not?" Miss Dubois asked softly. "Are you quite certain of that, Doctor?" Her words sent a chill through us that had nothing to do with the stormy night. There was something in her tone, something knowing and terrible. "What do you mean by that?" Mrs. Vance demanded. Miss Dubois smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Tell me, Mrs. Vance, what do you remember about accepting this invitation? What convinced you to travel all this way to dine with strangers?" I received a letter." "Yes, but why did you accept? What was it about the invitation that made it impossible to refuse?" Mrs. Vance opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. Her face went pale. I cannot quite." "None of us can," Major Cole said grimly. "Our memories seem strangely faulty." The next course materialized before us, a delicate shrimp creole. Again, we found ourselves eating despite our revulsion, our hands moving without our conscious control. "There's something we are not remembering," I said between bites. "Something important. Or something we are choosing not to remember," Miss Dubois corrected. Mrs. Croft suddenly gasped, her jeweled hand flying to her throat. But this time, it was not choking that took her. Instead, she began to convulse, her body racked with spasms as foam appeared at the corners of her mouth. "Poison," Dr. Finch said with clinical detachment. "Classic symptoms." Mrs. Croft's eyes rolled back in her head as the convulsions worsened. Her diamonds rattled against the chair as her body betrayed her, fighting a battle it could not win. When the end came, it was with a final shuddering breath that seemed to echo in the rafters above. She too began to fade, leaving 6 diners where there had been 10. "We are all going to die," Miss Bellwether whispered, "one by one. We are all going to die." "But why?" Mr. Bishop demanded, striking the table with his fist. "What have we done to deserve this? What have we done?" Miss Dubois repeated. "Oh, I think you know the answer to that question, Mr. Bishop. Deep down, I think we all know." The old man's face turned ashen. No, I refuse. That was years ago, decades ago." "Was it?" Miss Dubois' voice was gentle now, almost motherly. "Or was it last week, last night? How can you be sure when time seems to have lost all meaning in this place?" Memories began to surface then, fragments of something long buried, rising like ghosts from the bayou. I saw flashes. The same room, the same table, but younger faces, different clothes, a business meeting, a celebration that had gone terribly wrong. "The investment," I whispered. "Not an investment," Miss Dubois corrected. "Never an investment." The next course appeared, roasted duck with a cherry sauce, surrounded by seasonal vegetables. The rich smells should have been appetizing, but now they seemed heavy, suffocating. As we ate, more memories returned. A young man, barely out of college, who had trusted us with his inheritance. Thomas, his name had been Thomas Reed. He had threatened to expose our scheme, to tell the authorities what he had discovered. He was going to ruin us all, Major Cole said, his military composure crumbling. Our reputations, our families, our futures. So we silenced him, Dr. Finch added, his voice hollow. We told ourselves it was necessary, that we had no choice. But we did have a choice, I said, the full weight of our crimes settling on me like the humid Louisiana air. We could have let him speak the truth. The truth would have destroyed us. Mr. Bishop protested, though his words rang hollow. So instead we destroyed him, Miss Dubois said. A young man whose only crime was discovering our collective greed. We conspired together, all of us, to ensure his silence would be permanent. The memories came flooding back now. The plan we had hatched over bourbon and cigars in the library. The faked documents. The staged accident that looked like a suicide. We had told ourselves it was for the greater good, that one life was a small price to pay for preserving 9 fortunes. But the greater good had not protected us. One by one, over the years that followed, we had met our own ends. Natural deaths, most of them, though perhaps not entirely coincidental. Dr. Finch had suffered a heart attack in his office. Mrs. Vance had died in her sleep. They said Major Cole had drowned in a boating accident. We were all dead, had been dead for years. How long, Miss Bellwether asked, her voice barely audible. How long have we been gone? Time has no meaning here, Miss Dubois replied. We are summoned when summoned, made to relive our crime and its consequences. The young man we murdered, Thomas Reed, he ensures we never forget, never rest. As if conjured by the sound of his name, a figure began to materialize in the empty chair at the head of the table. Young, perhaps 22, with dark hair and sad, angry eyes. He wore a simple suit, but there was nothing simple about his presence now. Thomas Reed, our victim, our accuser, our judge. You remember now, he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. You remember what you did to me, what you took from me. Mr. Bishop began to convulse, his elderly frame racked with spasms that seemed to come from inside him rather than from any poison. He clutched at his chest, his face contorting with pain. Please, he gasped. I am sorry. We are all sorry. Sorry is not enough, Thomas said calmly. Sorry does not restore a life cut short, a future stolen. Mr. Bishop's struggles intensified, then gradually stopped. His body slumped forward, and like the others, he began to fade until only an empty chair remained. 5 now. 5 murderers facing their victim. The final course appeared, a magnificent bread pudding with a whiskey sauce. It should have been a celebration, the end of an elegant meal. Instead, it felt like a final, mocking gesture. Every year, Thomas continued, on the anniversary of my death, you are summoned here. You relive this evening, this gathering, this meal, and one by one, you experience the deaths you each met in life. Deaths that came too late to balance the scales of justice. Miss Bellwether began to weep, great choking sobs that shook her entire body. We were ambitious. We were greedy. We did not understand. You understood perfectly, Thomas replied. You understood that I threatened your comfortable lives, your social standing, your your carefully built fortunes, and you chose to eliminate that threat. Miss Bellwether's weeping grew more violent, her body convulsing with grief and guilt. But it was more than emotional distress that claimed her. It was as if the weight of her sorrow was literally crushing her, pressing the life from her body. She gasped for air that would not come, her hands clawing at her throat as if she could tear away the invisible force that was suffocating her. When she faded, 4 remained. Dr. Finch, myself, Major Cole, and Miss Dubois sat in silence, each knowing our turn would come. As lamps had burned lower, their flames dancing more frantically, as if sensing the end was near. How many times, I asked, how many times have we endured this? As many times as necessary, Thomas replied, until you truly understand the weight of what you have done. The life you stole, the future you erased. Dr. Finch suddenly clutched his chest, his face going gray. My heart, he gasped. Just like before, just like. He pitched forward onto the table. His death was swift, as it had been in life. A heart attack brought on by the stress of his crimes. 3 now. Major Cole tried to stand, perhaps to flee, perhaps to fight. But his body would not obey him. Instead, he began to choke and gasp, as if he were underwater, his lungs filling with an invisible liquid. The same drowning that had claimed him on his boat, whether by accident or by Thomas's ghostly intervention. 2 remained. Myself and Miss Dubois, sitting across from each other with Thomas's spectral form presiding over us both. Why, I asked, though I was not sure if I was addressing Thomas or Miss Dubois or the universe itself. Why do we continue to exist if we are already dead? Why are we not allowed to rest? Because, Miss Dubois said softly, some crimes are too great for simple death to erase. She smiled then, an expression of terrible peace, and I realized with horror that Miss Dubois was not struggling against her fate as the others had. She was welcoming it. You knew, I whispered. You remembered from the beginning. I never forgot, Miss Dubois replied. Not for a single day in life, not for a single moment in death. The guilt consumed me long before Thomas's justice claimed me. Miss Dubois' form began to shimmer and fade, but not in the violent way that had marked the others' deaths. She simply let go, releasing her hold on existence with what might have been relief. I sat alone now at the great table, facing Thomas Reed across the ruins of our macabre feast. The gas lamps were guttering, casting wild shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent life. And now, Thomas said, there is only you. I do not understand, I said, though even as I spoke, I knew it was a lie. I understood perfectly. I had always understood. You were the one who suggested the accident, Thomas continued relentlessly. You were the one who procured the boat. You were the one who drove me out onto the lake that night, pretending it was a friendly fishing trip. Memories crashed over me like a tidal wave. I saw myself as I had been, young, ambitious, engaged to be married to a woman from a prominent family. I had been at Blackwater Plantation that night for a different sort of gathering, a celebration of our successful business venture. But I had seen the flaw in our plan, the one loose end that could unravel everything. Thomas Reed, a good man who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, who had threatened to expose us all unless we made things right. You could have let me speak, Thomas said, his sad eyes never leaving my face. You could have let the truth be told. It would have ruined us all, I whispered. And so you ruined me instead. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the sharp, stabbing pain that had marked my own death years later. I had died of a stroke, a slow and agonizing end that had given me plenty of time to remember, to regret, to fear what might come after. I am sorry, I gasped, as the invisible pressure began to build in my head once more. I am so terribly sorry. I know you are, Thomas said, and for the first time, there was something like compassion in his voice. But sorry is not enough to undo what was done. Sorry does not restore what was taken. My vision began to blur as the familiar symptoms overtook me. The crushing pain in my head, the numbness in my limbs, the slow suffocation that had claimed me in life and would claim me again now. Will it ever end? I managed to whisper. Thomas was silent for a long moment, his ghostly form flickering in the dying lamplight. When you understand, he said finally, when you truly understand the weight of a life cut short, the magnitude of a future destroyed, the infinite value of what you stole from me, then perhaps there will be rest. My struggles grew weaker as the stroke completed its work. My last sight was of Thomas's face, young and sad, and infinitely patient, watching me with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. Darkness claimed me, as it had so many times before, and in the darkness, I heard the tall case clock chiming midnight, marking the end of another August 12th, another anniversary of our crime. The gas lamps guttered out one by one, leaving Blackwater Plantation in the silence and shadow it had known for decades. In the morning, if morning ever came to this place, the dining room would be empty. The table would be bare, the chairs pushed neatly into place, waiting for the next summoning, the next August 12th, the next gathering of the guilty. For some crimes are too great for death to cleanse, and some victims too wronged to grant easy forgiveness. In the space between life and judgment, between crime and true justice, the dead would gather again and again, reliving their guilt until they learned to carry the full weight of what they had done. Thomas Reed would see to that. He had nothing but time and the patience of the truly wronged. He would wait as long as necessary, summon us as often as required, until we understood that some debts can only be paid in eternal remembrance of the price of human life. The plantation settled into silence, its secrets safe for another year. But on the bayou, the humid air carried whispers of invitation. And somewhere in the realm between life and death, 10 figures stirred, waiting for the call that would bring them together once more. For the dead do not rest easily, and the guilty never rest at all. The invitation would come again next year, written in the same fancy script on the same thick paper. 10 strangers would gather for dinner, their memories clouded, their guilt suppressed, but never truly forgotten. And Thomas Reed would be waiting, patient as a cypress root, relentless as the river itself, ready to serve justice one course at a time, in the dining room of Blackwater Plantation, where the dead dine on remembrance, and the guilty feast on their own sins, world without end. thank you for spending this time with me tonight, lovely souls. I hope this story brought you a moment of calm and curiosity. I'd love to know what part of the story stayed with you the most. Drop a comment and share your thoughts. I always love hearing from you. If you enjoyed tonight's journey, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue exploring these quiet moments together. Now, take one last deep, gentle breath. Get cozy and let the calm of the night carry you softly until we meet again.